What would you sacrifice for legacy? In the winter of 1743, deep in the Yorkshire moors, Baron Edmund Grimwood locked the gates to his ancestral estate and made a decision that would turn his daughters into prisoners, his bloodline into an abomination, and his home into a chamber of unspeakable horrors. The locals whispered about the screams that echoed through the fog. They noticed when the three Grimwood sisters stopped appearing at church. But what if I told you the truth was so much darker than anyone dared imagine? Welcome to Shadow Stories, where we uncover the secrets history tried to bury. If you have the courage to hear what really happened behind the walls of Grimwood Manor, then you're in the right place. Subscribe now and comment below with where you're watching from, because what you're about to hear will change how you think about legacy, power, and the monsters that hide behind respectable names. Let's begin. Picture Georgian England in 1743. This was an age of enlightenment, yes, but also an era when aristocratic bloodlines meant everything. The great estates of Yorkshire sat like fortresses on the windswept moors, isolated from scrutiny, governed by their own rules. Grimwood Manor was one such estate, a sprawling Gothic structure of dark stone and narrow windows, surrounded by hundreds of acres of moorland, where the fog rolled in thick as wool, and the nearest village lay 5 miles down a rutted road. Inside these manor houses, the nobility lived by codes of honor and inheritance that outsiders barely understood. Primogeniture ruled absolutely. The eldest son inherited everything. Without a male heir, a family's wealth, title, and legacy could vanish into the hands of distant cousins or revert to the crown. This wasn't just about money. This was about immortality through bloodline, about a family name carved into history, and for men like Baron Edmund Grimwood, the pressure to produce the perfect heir wasn't just social expectation, it became an all-consuming obsession. The Yorkshire gentry rarely intervened in each other's affairs. Privacy was sacred. What happened behind the walls of a great house stayed there. The servants were loyal, the church was deferential to wealth, and the magistrates were often relatives or friends. In this world, a powerful man could do almost anything, and the only witnesses would be those too frightened or too dependent to ever speak. The cold stone walls of these estates held secrets that would never see daylight, and in 1743, as winter settled over the moors, Baron Grimwood began an experiment that would test just how far that privacy could shield the unthinkable. Baron Edmund Grimwood was, by all accounts, a model of English nobility, educated at Cambridge, well-traveled across Europe, a patron of the sciences, and particularly fascinated by the new theories of heredity and breeding that were revolutionizing agriculture. He'd made his fortune expanding on, and his inheritance through innovative livestock breeding. His cattle and horses were renowned throughout England for their superior qualities. At 45, he was a widower. His wife, Lady Catherine, had died in 1742, giving birth to their fourth child, another daughter. No sons, 4 daughters. The Baron took his wife's death with stoic dignity, at least publicly. He was described by contemporaries as handsome in a severe way, with sharp features, penetrating grey eyes, and a mind that never stopped calculating. He read voraciously everything from ancient Greek philosophy to modern treatises on animal husbandry. He kept meticulous journals. He corresponded with natural philosophers across Europe. His neighbors respected him. The local vicar praised his generosity to the church. But those who knew him best, his household staff, his few close confidants, noticed something unsettling. The Baron didn't grieve his wife the way other men grieved. He grieved the loss of his breeding opportunity. In his private study, he kept a family tree that went back 12 generations, with extensive notes on the traits of each ancestor. He spoke of bloodlines the way a horse breeder spoke of stud records. And after his wife's death, his attention turned with disturbing intensity to his 3 eldest daughters, Catherine, 17, Eleanor, 15, and Margaret, 13. His youngest, the infant Anne, was sent to live with relatives. It was a mercy, though no one knew it at the time. The story Baron Grimwood told the world was perfectly reasonable, even admirable. After his wife's death, he withdrew from society to focus on raising his daughters properly. He would personally oversee their education, he announced, ensuring they became accomplished young women worthy of advantageous marriages. This wasn't unusual. Many aristocratic fathers took active roles in their daughters' education, especially when no mother was present. The Baron hired tutors in music, French, and needlework, all the proper accomplishments for young ladies. He had the girls' portraits painted and displayed them prominently. He spoke warmly of their futures, of the fine matches he would arrange. When neighbors asked why the girls no longer attended church or social functions, he explained that they were in mourning for their mother and needed time away from public scrutiny. It was a respectable, even touching excuse. When the tutors stopped coming after a few months, the Baron explained he'd decided to teach the girls himself. He was, after all, highly educated and wanted to impart his knowledge directly. The household staff who might have questioned this were gradually replaced with new servants, carefully selected for their loyalty and discretion, and paid far more than the usual rate. By early 1744, Grimwood Manor had become a closed world. The Baron and his 3 daughters lived there with a skeleton staff of servants who spoke to no one outside the estate. Letters from concerned relatives were answered with reassurances. Everything appeared proper from the outside, and that's exactly how Edmund Grimwood wanted it. Because behind the facade of devoted fatherhood, he was beginning an experiment that would have horrified every person who'd praised his name. Let me take you inside Grimwood Manor, as it existed by 1744. The Baron had spent months preparing. The east wing of the house, where the family's private chambers had always been, was redesigned. He had workmen brought from distant counties and paid for their silence, renovate 3 separate suites of rooms. Each suite was identical: a bedchamber, a sitting room, a small library, and most disturbingly, a locked door that connected directly to the Baron's own master chamber. These weren't the rooms of daughters, they were the quarters of rotating wives. The Baron had studied architecture as well as breeding. He understood how space could control people. Each daughter's suite was comfortable, even luxurious, but isolated. Thick walls, windows that looked out over empty moorland, doors that locked from the outside. He installed a system of bells, so he could summon any daughter at any time. In the cellars, he created what he called his recordium, a study where he kept detailed journals of his experiment. Medical instruments lined the shelves, charts tracking menstrual cycles hung on the walls, books on animal breeding and heredity filled cases. This wasn't madness. This was methodology. He hired a midwife from Scotland, a woman with a questionable past who asked no questions and took gold to ensure her silence. He dismissed the family physician and brought in a doctor from London who was willing to make discreet monthly visits for a generous retainer. The household staff, now reduced to just 5 carefully chosen servants, were forbidden from entering the east wing. They cooked, cleaned the common areas, and maintained the grounds, but the Baron's chambers and his daughter's suites were his domain alone. By the spring of 1744, everything was ready. The trap was set, and the 3 Grimwood sisters had no idea what was coming. Now, I want you to understand something crucial about how this was possible. Because I know what you're thinking. Surely someone noticed. Surely someone said something. They did notice. But the Baron had an answer for everything. When the local vicar expressed concern that the girls hadn't been to church in over a year, Edmund explained they were being educated in religious matters at home and would return to public worship when they were ready. He even invited the vicar to dinner, though. Notably, the daughters didn't appear. They're shy after their mother's death, he explained, but they're flourishing in their studies. When relatives wrote asking to visit, he replied that the girls were at a delicate age and needed stability, not the disruption of visitors. Perhaps in another year, when a distant cousin arrived unannounced, the Baron met him at the gate with profuse apologies. There was illness in the house, nothing serious, but he couldn't risk the cousin's health. The man left, reassured by the Baron's evident concern. The servants who'd been dismissed, they were given generous severance and glowing references, along with veiled suggestions that speaking ill of their former employer would be unwise. Most took the money and said nothing. Those who tried to whisper rumors found themselves discredited after all. Who would believe a dismissed servant over a respected baron? The new staff signed contracts with strict confidentiality clauses and monetary penalties for breaking them. They were also rotated frequently enough that none stayed long enough to piece together the full horror of what was happening. And the girls themselves? If any of them tried to send letters begging for help, those letters never left the estate. The baron controlled all correspondence. He controlled all information flowing in and out of Grimwood Manor. By 1745, the house had become a sealed box, and inside it, something monstrous was taking shape. Every villain needs accomplices, whether willing or coerced. For Baron Grimwood, that accomplice was Dr. Cyrus Blackwell, a physician who'd been struck off the medical register in London for conducting unauthorized anatomical experiments. Desperate, disgraced, and deeply in debt, Blackwell found in the Baron a patron who asked no questions about his past and paid extraordinarily well for absolute discretion. Blackwell wasn't evil in the traditional sense. He was a man who'd convinced himself that scientific advancement justified moral compromise. When the Baron first approached him in late 1743, he presented the arrangement in clinical terms. He needed a physician to monitor the health of his daughters and assist with childbirth when the time came. Nothing scandalous, just medical care in a private setting. The generous salary, £50 a year, more than most physicians earned, sealed the agreement. But Blackwell knew, perhaps not at first, but certainly by the time he made his third monthly visit to Grimwood Manor and was asked to examine all three daughters to confirm their fertility and readiness for marriage. The examinations were invasive, inappropriate, and conducted with the Baron present, taking notes like a breeder inspecting livestock. Blackwell felt the wrongness of it, but he also felt the weight of the gold in his pocket. He told himself he was ensuring the girl's health. He was preventing complications. He was there to help if things went wrong. These were the lies men tell themselves when they become complicit in evil. The Baron trusted him because Blackwell had everything to lose. If the doctor ever spoke of what happened at Grimwood Manor, he'd be arrested, tried, and likely hanged. His silence was guaranteed by his own vulnerability. And so, once a month, Dr. Blackwell made the journey across the moors, carrying his medical bag, averting his eyes from the truth he was helping to perpetuate. Catherine, Eleanor, and Margaret Grimwood. Let me tell you who they really were, before their father turned them into experiments. Catherine, the eldest at 17 when this began, was described by her former governess as thoughtful and literary, with a passion for poetry and a gentle disposition. She'd been close to her mother and took Lady Catherine's death the hardest. She'd dreamed of marrying a kind man and having a house full of books and children. She wrote in secret diaries about wanting to fall in love. Eleanor, at 15, was the most spirited of the three. She loved riding across the moors, was curious about everything, asked endless questions, and challenged her tutors on points of history and philosophy. She had her father's sharp mind but her mother's warmth. She was the one most likely to question, to resist, to fight back. She terrified the Baron for exactly that reason. Margaret, just 13, was the baby of the trio after little Anne was sent away. She was artistic, spent hours drawing and painting, and had a gift for music that made servants weep when she played piano. She was also the most trusting, the most eager to please her father, the one who still believed he had her best interests at heart. They were children, that's what we must never forget. When their father began his experiment, the youngest was 13 years old. They'd just lost their mother. They were grieving, vulnerable, isolated. They had no advocates, no protectors, no one to turn to, and the man who should have been their defender, their father, became their jailer and their abuser. Everything that happened to them happened because they were powerless, and he was not. In the summer of 1745, a young woman named Mary Thorne arrived at Grimwood Manor as a new housemaid. She was 19, from a village 20 miles away, and desperately needed the employment. Her father had died, leaving debts. The position at Grimwood paid twice the usual wage for servants, and she was told the work would be light. Keep the common areas clean. Help with meals. Ask no questions. For the first 2 weeks, it seemed like a dream position. The house was mostly empty. She rarely saw the Baron. She heard occasional sounds from the east wing, footsteps, doors closing, once a muffled sob, but was told never to go there. The other servants were pleasant enough but oddly tight-lipped about the family. Then one evening in August, everything changed. Mary was carrying fresh linens up the back stairs when she heard it. A scream. Not a startled shriek, but a prolonged, agonized wail that made her blood turn cold. It came from behind a door in the east wing. She froze, the linen slipping from her hands. The scream came again, followed by sobbing, and then the Baron's voice, cold and commanding. "Quiet. You'll wake the household. This is necessary, Eleanor. For the bloodline." Mary should have run. Instead, she crept closer. Through a gap in the doorway, she saw into a candle-lit room. A young woman, she'd later realize it was Eleanor, was on a bed, clearly in distress. The Baron stood over at her, utterly unmoved. And in the corner, another young woman sat watching with dead eyes, her belly visibly swollen with pregnancy. Mary understood something terrible was happening. Even if she couldn't yet grasp the full horror, she backed away, her heart hammering. But she'd been seen. The Baron's eyes flicked to the doorway and met hers for one frozen moment. His expression didn't change. He simply nodded to someone Mary couldn't see, and a door closed. The next morning, Mary was summoned to the Baron's study. He sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, regarding her with the calm of a man who'd anticipated this moment. The conversation was brief. He offered her a choice. Remain at Grimwood Manor with a substantial increase in salary and sign a binding oath of silence, or leave immediately with a year's wages and the understanding that if she ever spoke of what she'd seen, he would ruin her family completely. He had the power to do it. She knew it. She signed. But the terror of that moment, the image of those dead eyes, the sound of that scream, they would haunt Mary Thorne for the rest of her life. Mary Thorne lingered 6 months, each day a chisel to her sanity. Money in pocket. Contract. Inked. Yet the east wing bled sound. Footsteps on a timetable. Muffled cries. The Baron's measured tread. Blackwell's monthly carriage. Face scrubbed of expression. Trays ascended full, descended scraped clean. Once, a window-framed Catherine ghost in silk, bones pressing, cloth. Servants had trained themselves blind, deaf, mute. Mary could not. Fragments assembled in her skull. Daughters never outdoors, barren rotating rooms, birth screams crowning nights then vanishing into hush. Infants born, infants erased. How many? 3? The math curdled sleep. By February, 1,746 nightmares rode her awake, convinced the manor's walls had followed. Hands trembled, pouring the Baron's tea. He watched the spill with a naturalist's calm. March. She bolted, wages clutched, village bound, truth burning her tongue. Magistrate heard, scoffed. Honorable Baron, signed contract. Slander will beggar you. Vicar patted air. Nerves, my dear. Isolation breeds fancies. Doors slammed. Baron's name was armor. Her word, rags. Months later she swallowed the story whole. Worked odd jobs. Drifted. Villagers muttered. Touched. Midnight. She weighed madness against memory, easier to doubt her eyes than the world's. In 1748, 5 years into the Baron's experiment, concerns finally reached a level that demanded official attention. Too many servants had left Grimwood Manor with strange stories. Too many relatives had been rebuffed when asking to visit. A few brave souls had spoken to clergy, magistrates, neighbours. The whispers had grown loud enough that the Yorkshire magistrate, Lord Pemberton, felt compelled to act not because he believed the rumours, but because failing to investigate would make him look negligent. So he wrote to Baron Grimwood requesting permission to visit the estate and verify the well-being of his daughters. It was phrased politely, almost apologetically. The Baron responded immediately, expressing understanding and welcoming the visit. A date was set, and then, with cold calculation, Edmund Grimwood prepared his stage. On the day of the visit, Lord Pemberton arrived with a small party including a clerk and a local vicar. They were received graciously. The house looked respectable, even cheerful. The Baron personally gave them a tour of the public rooms, and then he presented his daughters. All three young women appeared in the drawing room, properly dressed, appropriately demure. They were thin, concerningly so, but the Baron explained they'd all been ill with a fever that winter. They were pale, but that was fashionable among ladies of quality. Most significantly, they all confirmed they were well treated and content. Lord Pemberton asked them directly, in their father's presence, if they wished to leave or needed assistance. Each daughter shook her head and murmured that she was perfectly happy. Catherine, the eldest, even managed a thin smile and said she was grateful for her father's care during her illness. The magistrate left satisfied. The inquiry was closed. Official report: no evidence of wrongdoing. What Lord Pemberton couldn't know, was that the Baron had rehearsed this performance for weeks. The daughters had been coached on exactly what to say. More importantly, they'd been given a clear choice: cooperate with the visit, and life would continue as it was, or resist and face consequences too terrible to name. By this point, the sisters knew their father's capacity for cruelty. They knew what happened to babies that didn't meet his standards. They knew resistance was futile, so they performed their roles perfectly, and the one chance they had for rescue disappeared down the drive with Lord Pemberton's carriage. The official inquiry hadn't been designed to uncover truth. It had been designed to provide plausible deniability, to let everyone involved feel they'd done their duty. And it worked exactly as such systems always do, protecting the powerful while the powerless suffered. 7 years in, the Grimwood sisters were relics. Servants glimpsing through cracked doors saw spectres. Catherine, 24, grey-haired, 40 in, gate each step a ledger of births and fractures. 4 infants ripped away, destination unknown. Her eyes, once lit by novels, now hollowed sockets. Eleanor, 22, older, in flinch. The Baron had hammered her spark longest. It showed in downcast lids, the reflex jerk at shadows. 3 labors, each a near death. Each child vanished before the cord cooled. Fire quenched, only ash. Margaret, 20, but childhood murdered at 13 carried the deepest wound. 2 births, 7 years of violation, piano silent, sketchbooks blank. She stared at plaster, murmuring to ghosts. Body ravaged, sun-starved, bones brittle. Dr. Blackwell's secret scribbles later exhumed charted the collapse. Catherine's tremor, Eleanor's black melancholia, Margaret's drift into silence. Horror noted, fee pocketed, carriage rolled on. They were the crime incarnate. Wombs emptied, spirits gutted, youth calcified. Living evidence, mute and monstrous yet unseen, unheard, because no one dared look. Let me show you how Baron Grimwood's mind worked, because this is the part that makes it truly horrifying. He wasn't acting out of simple lust or madness. He'd created a system, a methodology, based on his understanding of breeding theory. In his private journals discovered years later, he laid it all out with chilling clarity. The Baron believed that the purest bloodline came from concentrating family traits. He'd seen it work with horses and cattle. Why not humans? His 3 daughters shared his blood and his dead wife's blood. If he impregnated each of them, the resulting children would be 3/4 Grimwood stock. If those children then bred with each other or with him, the bloodline would become even more concentrated. Eventually, he theorized, he'd create the perfect heir child who embodied the best qualities of the Grimwood line without dilution from outside blood. He kept meticulous records. Each daughter had a file tracking her menstrual cycles, times of conception, duration of pregnancy, and characteristics of offspring. He measured the baby's length, weight, hair color, eye color, and made notes on which combinations seemed to produce superior results. Those that didn't meet his standards simply disappeared. He rotated between his daughters according to a schedule designed to maximize breeding opportunities while allowing recovery time. Catherine, as the eldest and strongest initially, bore the heaviest burden. Eleanor's resistance made her a challenge case that he documented extensively. Margaret, starting youngest, was his long-term subject for tracking development. He even graphed all fertility cycles, gestation periods, recovery rates. He corresponded with agricultural reformers across Europe about breeding theory, never mentioning he was applying their livestock methodologies to his own children. In his mind, he wasn't committing crimes, he was conducting science. He was advancing human understanding of heredity. He was ensuring his family's genetic immortality. This is what makes it so terrifying. Baron Edmund Grimwood didn't see himself as a monster. He saw himself as a visionary, someone brave enough to do what others wouldn't for the sake of progress. His methodology was careful, documented, refined over years. He adjusted his approach based on results. He problem-solved. He optimized. He brought the cold rationality of the Enlightenment to an act of profound evil, and he never once, in thousands of pages of journals, expressed remorse or doubt, just notes on improving outcomes for the next generation. Thomas Ashford never meant to become a hero. He was 32 years old in 1756, a former soldier who'd served in the War of Austrian Succession and returned to England with a bad leg wound and no prospects. He'd grown up in Yorkshire, the son of a blacksmith, and had managed through luck and military service to gain basic literacy and a harder edge than most men of his class. After the war, he drifted from job to job until he heard that Baron Grimwood was hiring a groundskeeper for his isolated estate. The pay was excellent, the work straightforward. Thomas needed money. He took the position. He arrived at Grimwood Manor in March 1756 with no idea what he was walking into. His duties were simple: maintain the grounds, repair fences, keep the gardens orderly. He was told explicitly to never enter the main house without permission and never approach the east wing under any circumstances. He was given a cottage on the edge of the estate and largely left alone. Thomas was observant in the way soldiers learn to be. He noticed things, the way no one from the main house ever went outside, the separate meals prepared and carried upstairs, the physician who visited monthly and always looked troubled when he left, the sounds that sometimes drifted from upper windows on quiet nights. He'd seen horror in the war. He recognized its presence here. What set Thomas apart was that he'd also seen complacency. He'd watched good men do nothing in the face of evil, because it wasn't their problem, wasn't their duty, wasn't their place to interfere. He'd sworn after the war that he wouldn't be that man again, so he started paying attention. He made friends with the servants, learned what little they knew or admitted to knowing. He walked the grounds at night and mapped the house's patterns. He found excuses to linger near the east wing, and one day in July 1756, he saw her. Eleanor. She appeared at a window, pressed against the glass like a ghost, her mouth open in a silent scream for help. Their eyes met for just a moment before she was yanked backward and disappeared. That moment changed everything. Thomas Ashford decided, right then, that whatever was happening in that house, he was going to stop it. Even if it cost him everything. Thomas Ashford stalked the manor like a ghost in daylight. Proof was a phantom. Storming in would only gift the Baron a trespass charge. So he wove patience into the servants' hours. Mrs. Hartley, cook of 3 years, hovered on confession's edge whenever he collected stew. He fed her silence with gentle questions until she cracked. Daughters vanished, contracts signed, wages blood-stained. Fear and guilt chained her tighter than any lock. Stable-boy Peter, 16, slow of tongue, sharp of eye, mumbled of night-born cries that never learned to walk. Dr. Blackwell's carriage ghosted in, ghosted out, sometimes cradling bundles too still for life. Peter's shrug carried the weight of graves. November 1756. The Baron gone to London. Thomas traced the East Wing service vein, a forgotten door for slop buckets. Lock succumbed to army memory. Midnight swallowed him. Corridors exhaled fever and rot. 3 doors, iron bolted from without. First, sleeper's breath. Second, sobs braided, and with prayer. Third, silence, thick as earth. Pick, click, enter. Opulence turned tomb velvet walls, barred moon. Margaret lay swollen, burning, months from another birth. Eyes flicked open, hope and terror warred. "Save us," she rasped, "before he kills us all." Fevered fragments spilled, years of forced seed. Infants snatched or snuffed, sisters caged next door, journals in the study charting every atrocity. Blackwell, the paid midwife to murder. Systematic, documented, endless. Thomas pressed her hand, promise, oath, heartbeat, then melted back into night, carrying her voice like contraband. Testimony from the cage, mapped to the cage-maker's ledger. Now to turn whisper into thunder without the manor swallowing him whole. I need to pause here for a moment and speak to you directly, because what I've just described is difficult to hear, and what comes next is even darker. The next part of this story is where everything the Baron built begins to collapse, where his carefully controlled experiment spirals into chaos, where a hero finally emerges from the shadows. But before we continue, I have to ask you something. Can you handle what comes next? Because this is where the story turns from systematic horror to desperate survival. This is where we meet the person who finally said, "Enough. If you're still with me, if you want to know how this ends, then I need you to do something. Subscribe to Shadow Stories right now. Hit that button. Because channels like this, channels that tell the stories history tried to erase, only survive. If people like you take a stand and say, these stories matter, comment below if you're ready to continue this investigation. Tell me where you're watching from, and then steel yourself. Because the truth about Grimwood Manor is about to get even more chilling. Let's keep going. Thomas Ashford knew testimony alone wouldn't be enough. He'd seen how the world worked, a groundskeeper's word against a baron's. He'd be dismissed as a liar or madman. He needed proof. He needed the baron's own words condemning him. 3 weeks. After his first intrusion into the East Wing, Thomas found his opportunity. Baron Grimwood travelled to London again, this time for a week-long stay. The house was less guarded with the master gone. On the second night, Thomas broke into the main house through a cellar window. He moved through the dark halls like a ghost, his soldier's instincts guiding him past the sleeping servants' quarters. The Baron's study was locked, but Thomas was becoming expert at picking the simple locks of the era. Inside, he lit a single candle and began his search. The room was lined with bookcases and filing cabinets. Where would a man keep his darkest secrets? Not hidden, Thomas realized. A man like the Baron, who saw his actions as scientific advancement, would keep meticulous records in plain sight. He found them in a leather-bound journal series on the main desk. 17 volumes, dated from 1743 to the present. Thomas opened the first volume and nearly vomited. The opening entry laid out the entire plan. The Baron's theory of concentrated bloodlines, his intention to use his daughters as breeding stock, his criteria for evaluating offspring, his methods for disposing of failures. Page after page of clinical observations about his daughters' fertility, their pregnancies, their psychological deterioration, sketches of family trees showing planned breeding chains, correspondence with European scientists discussing heredity theory in veiled terms. Thomas couldn't take all 17 volumes, too obvious, too heavy. So he took the first 3, which established intent and methodology, and the most recent volume, which documented ongoing crimes. He also found something else, a ledger of payments to Dr. Blackwell, with notes about what services he'd provided. Evidence of conspiracy. Thomas wrapped the journals in oilcloth, hid them in his cottage, and returned everything else to appear undisturbed. When Baron Grimwood returned from London, he noticed nothing amiss. He had no idea his downfall now rested in a groundskeeper's hands. But Thomas still faced the same problem. Who would believe him? Thomas knew he had one shot at this. If he approached the wrong authority, word would reach the Baron before anything could be done. He needed someone powerful enough to stand against a Baron and moral enough to act on the evidence. After careful consideration, he chose Lord William Harrington, a magistrate in Leeds known for his reformist views and his willingness to challenge the aristocracy. Thomas left Grimwood Manor on the 15th of December 1756, supposedly on a brief holiday he'd requested weeks earlier. He carried the journals hidden in his travel pack. The journey to Leeds normally took 2 days. Thomas planned to make it in one, riding hard through the winter weather. But fate intervened. 10 miles from Grimwood Manor, his horse threw a shoe. By the time he found a blacksmith and got the animal reshod, precious hours had been lost. And back at the manor, the Baron had made a terrible discovery. He'd gone to his study to record a new entry and immediately noticed the journals were missing. Not misplaced, missing. 4 specific volumes. His face, witnesses later said, turned white as chalk. He knew exactly what this meant. Someone had penetrated his sanctuary and stolen the evidence of his life's work, his crimes. The Baron moved with terrifying speed. He questioned every servant under threat of immediate dismissal and prosecution. The cook, Mrs. Hartley, broke first. She admitted that the groundskeeper, Thomas Ashford, had been asking questions. He'd been too interested in the East Wing. He'd disappeared 2 nights ago on a supposed holiday. The Baron didn't hesitate. He saddled his fastest horse, took his pistol, and rode after Thomas with the fury of a man who had everything to lose. Thomas, delayed by the horse trouble, was only halfway to Leeds when he heard the thunder of hoofbeats behind him. He glanced back and saw the Baron, riding like a demon across the moorland. There was no question what would happen if he was caught. Thomas dug his heels into his horse and ran. What followed was a desperate chase across the Yorkshire moors. 2 men, one carrying evidence of unspeakable crimes, the other trying to destroy it. The winter wind whipped around them. Thomas's horse was tired from travel. The Baron's was fresh. The distance closed. They raced through the gathering darkness. Thomas could hear the Baron screaming for him to stop, promising mercy if he returned the journals, threatening death if he didn't. At one point, the Baron fired his pistol. The shot went wide, but close enough that Thomas felt the wind of it. He pushed harder, his wounded leg screaming in agony from gripping the horse. Just as the Baron nearly caught him, Thomas saw salvation. A coaching inn ahead, with lights blazing and travelers visible outside. Witnesses. The Baron couldn't murder him in front of witnesses. Thomas rode straight into the inn yard, leaped from his horse, and ran inside, shouting for help. The Baron arrived seconds later, but had to compose himself with people watching. He dismounted calmly, played the role of concerned employer, claimed his groundskeeper had stolen from him, and he simply wanted his property returned. But Thomas was already convincing the innkeeper to send for the local magistrate. He'd reached civilization, and with witnesses present, the Baron couldn't simply kill him and take the journals. The chase was over, but the real battle was just beginning. It took 2 days, but finally, on the 18th of December 1756, a formal raid on Grimwood Manor was authorized. Lord Harrington, the reformist magistrate Thomas had originally hoped to reach, had gotten word of the situation and demanded to be part of the investigation. He arrived with constables, a physician, and Sir Harold, who, despite his friendship with the Baron, wanted to see the truth with his own eyes. Thomas guided them to the East Wing. The doors were still locked from outside. When they broke through, the smell hit them first, a mixture of sickness, unwashed bodies, and despair that spoke of years of captivity. In the first room, they found Catherine. At 29 years old, she looked 60. She was huddled in the corner of her bed, shaking, unable to speak coherently. 13 years of imprisonment and forced pregnancies had shattered her mind. The physician who examined her wept. In the second room was Eleanor. She didn't react when they entered, just stared at the wall with those dead eyes. When Lord Harrington gently told her she was being rescued, she laughed a horrible, broken sound. "Rescued?" she whispered. "There's nothing left to rescue." She'd borne 6 children over 13 years. None had survived past infancy. In the third room, they found Margaret. She was 23 but could barely walk. Her body had been so damaged by repeated pregnancies and poor medical care that she'd never fully recover. But when she saw Thomas among the rescuers, She reached for his hand and managed to smile. "You came back," she said. "You promised, and you came back." The raiders also found the Baron's recordium in the cellar, that study where he'd kept his charts, his measurements, his breeding records. The walls were covered with family trees, showing 3 generations of planned incestuous breeding. Medical instruments designed for forced examinations lay in neat rows. Most horrifying were the specimen jars containing preserved tissue, evidence of pregnancies terminated because the offspring didn't meet the Baron's genetic standards. They found records of 9 births total, 9 babies born to these 3 women over 13 years. The fate of each child was meticulously documented. 3 had been eliminated for genetic deficiencies in infancy. 2 had been given to orphanages far from Yorkshire with false names, deemed acceptable but not optimal by the Baron. 4 were unaccounted for. The journals suggested they died during birth or shortly after and been buried on the estate grounds. Searches of the grounds eventually uncovered a small plot behind the stables where 5 tiny bodies were buried, including one from a pregnancy that had never been recorded in the stolen journals. The scene at Grimwood Manor made hardened constables physically ill. This wasn't just crime. It was systematic torture masquerading as science. And it had gone on for 13 years while respectable society looked the other way. In the interrogation room, the mask melted. Baron Grimwood, cornered by ink and bone, offered no. Repentance only, ledger logic. Daughters, honored vessels for bloodline ascension. Dead infants, culled to standard. Comfortable cages, he insisted. Broken minds, mere side effects of science. Roots traced back. Wife's grave. Dinner table rants on purity. Kin severed for urging remarriage. Why import mongrel seed when perfection waits at home? Guests had laughed nervously. No one pressed. Dr. Blackwell, cuffs cold, spilled everything, visits, births, midnight burials. Coercion, he whined, yet his notes gleamed with meticulous pride and fat purses. Conscience arrived only with the noose. Servants, prodded, admitted glimpses. Mrs. Hartley knew 3 years, fed her family silence. A baron's whim outweighed their lives. Truth was unemployment, maybe worse. One architect, dozens of enablers. Grimwood built the abattoir, society handed him the keys and looked away. The manor's true corpse was collective courage. The baron's letters, once cracked by his own journals, unveiled a guild of blue-blooded butchers. German count, French duke, English earl, inked in cipher. They swapped propagation protocols like vintners' tasting notes. The count's nieces had broken free, forcing as Swiss bolt. The duke purred of early yields. Lord Blackthorne begged blueprints. Raid later found his nieces caged 5 years. No lone lunatic. This was enlightenment curdled into eugenics. Aristocracy, convinced their veins ran too rare for common blood. Incest as improvement, daughters as dams. They praised, refined, shielded one another. Europe reeled. One manor's rot revealed a trans-border creed. Outrage flared, protect the girls, burn the ideology. 7 lords faced courts in 3 realms. Some fled, some died first. Grimwood's science, meant for posterity's applause, became the prosecution's atlas to every hidden stall. The true knife twist. It was stoppable. Post-raid, journalists unearthed a quilt of averted eyes. Vicar swallowed Baron's sick daughter's excuse, fearing noble wrath. Magistrate in 48 saw pallor, shrugged illness, not chains. Ex-servants whispered, horrors to parsons, employers, constables, each tale buried as gossip or lunacy. Mary Thorne, 1746 escapee, resurfaced post-arrest. Her warnings branded hysteria, threats her reward. How many Marys were gagged? Editors hoarded anonymous letters too explosive without proof, too perilous to chase her. Lord, Dr. Blackwell's monthly carriage, unquestioned. Peerage was passport. Class welded the silence, no plot, just reflex. Servants disbelieved, women dismissed. Manor doors sacred. Grimwood ripped the veil. Privilege's shield doubles as evil's cloak. Reforms crawled, but the question rang how. to build a world where Mary is heard, where rank buys no blindfold, where truth outranks title. The manor's echo would hound the century. March 1757. Baron Edmund Grimwood in the dock. Journals splayed like entrails. Daughters testified. Blackwell squealed. The estate coughed up bones. The Baron, unblinking, claimed science and law as twin shields. The jury needed 90 minutes. Guilty murder, rape, false imprisonment. May 3, York gallows, thousands bayed. He cursed posterity's blindness. Rope answered with a choke. Slow strangulation, justice or mercy, take your pick. Dr. Blackwell, shipped to the colonies, an accessory brand on his soul, died mid-Atlantic, bile and regret. Blackthorn swung. The French Duke lost his head to the revolution. The German Count melted into forests. Thomas Ashford pocketed Parliament's gold, built England's first refuge for battered wives. Lived, quiet, died in 1789, folk saint. Catherine, sanatorium till 1763, 36, slept into death. Eleanor, testified like steel, then 1759, 27, noosed herself. Some prisons have no doors. Margaret, healed in Ashford's house, married gentle, bore a daughter, died 1802 at 69. Her 1780 memoir Iron Testament nailed the manor's ghost to history's page. Grimwood Manor fell in 1758, Parliament's axe on a cancer. Stones hauled off, cellars choked with earth. Now only wind combs heather, where screams once soaked the walls. A lone plaque mutters that something vile happened here, yet the echo outran the rubble. Parliament forged new law. Childhood was not parental property. The state could breach the hearth if blood demanded. Domestic shadows lost their old immunity. Science flinched. Grimwood's research alibi forced ethics into laboratories. When does inquiry curdle into atrocity? The question still stalks white coats. For women, the case was gunpowder. Absolute paternal right exposed as a loaded musket. Early feminists loaded the next round. Change crawled, but the crawl began. The deepest scar is silence. A baron's whim thrived because servants swallowed truth. Inspectors skimmed surfaces. Villagers nailed shutters against the cries. Evil rarely needs monsters. It needs bystanders polishing their own comfort. Thomas Ashford alone shouldered, the dark believed, the powerless, paid in peril, spoke when speech was treason. History hoards too many, averted eyes, too few like his. The moral is blunt, shout when you see rot, trust the bruised voice, kick every closed door. Monsters budget on our hush. One cracked silence, Ashford showed, can bankrupt them. So let me ask you something as we close this investigation. Could something like Baron Grimwood's experiment happen today? Would we see it coming? I want to believe we would. We have better laws now, more robust child protection services, mandatory reporters, systems designed to catch this kind of abuse. But here's what keeps me awake at night. We also have gated communities, private islands, isolated estates where the wealthy live beyond scrutiny. We have NDAs and financial settlements that buy silence. We have a culture that still, even now, sometimes, values reputation over truth. The mechanisms of power and secrecy that protected Baron Grimwood for 13 years do they really not exist anymore? Or have they just evolved? The Grimwood sisters didn't have voices anyone would listen to until Thomas Ashford amplified them. How many voices today aren't being heard? Who are the Mary Thorns of our time being called hysterical or lying when they try to report abuse? I'm not saying there's a Baron Grimwood operating right now. I'm asking if we'd know if there was. Would we believe the servants? Would we question the powerful? Would we have the courage Thomas Ashford had to risk everything for strangers? These are the questions Shadow Stories exists to ask. History isn't just about what happened, it's about what it teaches us for today. So, I need you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel right now if you haven't already, because these stories matter and they only get told if you support channels brave enough to tell them. Comment below with your thoughts. Where are you watching from? Did this story change how you think about power, silence, and responsibility? And here's the most important part. If you ever see something wrong, if you ever have that moment of suspicion that something terrible is happening behind closed doors, remember Thomas Ashford. Remember that speaking up, even when it's dangerous, even when you might not be believed, is how evil gets stopped. Be the person who doesn't look away. Be the person who breaks the silence, because somewhere, someone's survival might depend on your courage. This is Shadow Stories. And some shadows never fade, but we can choose to shine light into them.